The morning started like any other in the quiet, affluent suburb of New York. The lawns were pristine, the neighbors exchanged brief nods, and the hum of daily routines filled the air. But that calm was shattered when Emma Thompson dialed 911. Her voice, steady but laced with unease, reported that her husband, David Thompson, a well-known businessman, had been missing for over 24 hours. She mentioned for a business meeting, a trip he never returned from. Sarah Cooper, seasoned but weathered by years of personal and professional trials, was assigned the case. Initially, it seemed routine, a possible kidnapping, or maybe a midlife escape from the pressures of success. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet, as Sarah replayed Emma's call in her head, something about her calmness felt forced, rehearsed even. And so began the investigation into what at first appeared to be just another missing person case. The Thompson family lived in a sprawling, modern mansion nestled at the heart of Crestview, one of New York's most exclusive and guarded communities. Crestview was a world where appearances were everything: trimmed hedges, luxury cars, and smiling faces masked the underlying tensions of its residents. The pressure to maintain a perfect image was palpable, especially among the Thompsons' social circle. Here, secrets were currency, and the deeper you looked, the more cracks you could find beneath the flawless exterior. David Thompson, the center of the investigation. On the surface, he was the epitome of success, head of a multi-million-dollar investment firm, respected in business circles, and a prominent figure in the local community. His public persona was one of a man in control, but behind the scenes, things were unraveling. David had been involved in illegal financial dealings for years: shady investments, offshore accounts, and questionable partnerships that few, if any, were aware of. These acts to a select few, hidden. But the financial risks were not the only secrets he kept. David's marriage to Emma Thompson had been crumbling for years. What began as a picture-perfect relationship had slowly deteriorated into something cold and transactional. Emma, 36 years old, had once been seen as the trophy wife, beautiful, poised, and supportive. But the glamour faded as she found herself increasingly sidelined by David's growing business empire and his obvious disinterest in their marriage. Despite their public appearances, David barely spent time with her, opting instead for late nights at work or mysterious business trips that lasted far longer than necessary. What Emma didn't know was that David's trips were often an excuse for something far more personal: extramarital affairs. Emma herself wasn't innocent. Desperation, path she hadn't expected. And trapped. She began an side of her social class, named Lucas Hart. Affair started as an escape for Emma, a way to reclaim the attention and desire she once had. However, as her emotional dependence on Lucas grew, so did her ambitions. She began to see a way out, not just from her crumbling marriage, but from the control David had over her life. Emma wanted more. She wanted David's wealth, his assets, everything. And Lucas, eager to please and increasingly manipulated by Emma, started playing a dangerous game he wasn't prepared for. Detective Sarah Cooper, the woman now tasked with solving David's disappearance, was no stranger to the intricacies of the human mind. At 42, Sarah had spent nearly 2 decades on the force, building a reputation for her sharp intuition and analytical skills, particularly when it came to psychological profiling. But her often came at a personal. recently divorced and juggling the responsibilities of a single parent to a teenage daughter. Sarah was emotionally and physically drained. Though she had once been able to separate her work from her home life, the lines had blurred. The stress of her personal life began creeping into her investigations, and she found herself questioning her judgment more often than she liked. Despite her exhaustion, Sarah was committed to uncovering the truth. From the moment she met Emma Thompson, Sarah sensed something was off. Emma's polished demeanor didn't match the typical behavior of a woman whose husband had vanished. There was no hysteria, no outward panic, just a calculated calm that set Sarah's instincts on edge. Was Emma had years of experience made? Regardless, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a simple case of a husband skipping town. Unbeknownst to into something much more complex. The interconnected relationships between Crestviews, Ali David's financial misdeeds, Emma's affair, and Lucas's involvement would slowly unfold, each layer revealing a darker and more dangerous truth. The line between victim and perpetrator would blur, and Sarah, drawn deeper into the web of lies and deceit, would have to navigate her way through a maze of hidden agendas, all while battling her own demons. The investigation would push Sarah to her limits, not just as a detective, but as a mother and a woman trying to rebuild her life. In the end, the answers she sought would come at a price one that neither she nor anyone in Crestview could have anticipated. As the secrets of the Thompson family unraveled, so would the lives of everyone connected to them. As Detective Sarah Cooper delved deeper into the life of David Thompson, the image of the successful, upstanding businessman began to crumble. It didn't take long for her to uncover the skeletons. He had meticulously hidden away multiple affairs with younger women, each more secretive than the last. These weren't fleeting dalliances. They were calculated and sustained, each relationship carefully compartmentalized away from his marriage to Emma. Sarah sifted through the fragments of his personal life, incriminating texts, hotel receipts, and witness testimonies from a few of his former lovers. One by David's double life, but none of it to his disappearance. Affair seemed to lead to a dead end, a distraction rather than a key to solving the case. Despite didn't shake the growing suspicion more than she was letting on. Nothing too perfect about her reactions, grieving, but not devastated. Worried, but not frantic. It felt been preparing for this moment. Concrete evidence. Sarah's hands were tied. She needed something more than a gut feeling. The tension between Emma and David's marriage was palpable. Their public image as a power couple was a facade hiding years of neglect, control, and bitterness. Sarah could sense the cracks widening in Emma's cool demeanor. At first, Emma had played the role of the dutiful, devastated wife flawlessly. But as days went on, without any leads on David's whereabouts, her behavior grew increasingly erratic. She snapped at reporters, avoided further interviews with the police, and seemed unusually composed during moments that should have unraveled her. The whispers of her affair with Lucas Hart began to circulate. A construction manager from outside Crestviews high society who didn't seem to fit into her world. This added another layer to the investigation. Emma's potential motive for wanting David out of the picture was becoming clearer. Yet, Sarah had nothing concrete. Emma's actions were suspicious, but they weren't enough to incriminate her. The case was Sarah received the first of many. At first, the voice was low, indistinguishable, but the message was clear. Stop digging. You don't know what you're getting into, the caller whispered, sending a chill down her spine, before abruptly hanging up. Her mind racing. Just the affair or the missing man, there was something bigger at play. Something darker. Sarah felt the walls closing in, knowing she had to tread carefully. But her resolve only hardened. Whoever was behind this was getting desperate. In the days that followed, more disturbing pieces of David's life came to light. His financial records revealed a web of suspicious transactions, offshore accounts, and investments in projects with questionable legality. David hadn't just been a man with secrets. He was someone deeply entangled in illegal dealings that stretched beyond his personal infidelities. These discoveries opened a new line of inquiry for Sarah, but they also raised more questions. Had David gotten too deep into something he couldn't escape from? Was this the reason behind his disappearance? Or had he orchestrated his own vanishing act, knowing the walls were closing in on him from both his business and his personal life? The more Sarah uncovered, the more tangled the web became. Each new discovery introduced another layer of complexity, another potential motive. Was Emma seeking to free herself from a toxic marriage while securing David's wealth? Was David sinister than just a broken? Or was someone else, lurking in the shadows, pulling the strings of this entire operation? Each avenue seemed as plausible as the last, leaving Sarah and the reader in a constant state of uncertainty, unsure of which path would lead to the truth. The breakthrough came suddenly, but not in the way Sarah had anticipated. A call came in. David's body had been found. The was unexpected. A hidden apartment on the outskirts of the city, a place David had rented under a false name. The apartment itself was a stark contrast to the luxurious life he led with Emma. Small, nondescript space, but intimate. It didn't take long for Sarah to realize that this was where David had been conducting his extramarital affairs. The place, items, half-empty wine, discarded clothing, scent of perfume that was. But it was David's lifeless body that commanded the room. He was found slumped over in the living room, a single gunshot wound to the chest. Sarah's stomach churned as she took in the scene. This was no accident, and certainly not suicide. The positioning of the body, the lack of defensive wounds, it was clear David had been caught off guard. Possibly by someone he knew, someone he trusted. The crime scene offered clues, but they were far from definitive. Emma's fingerprints were found on a glass in the kitchen, but that, too, felt too convenient. Had she really been that careless? Or was someone framing her? Sarah's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. Emma had been calm, almost too calm, during her interviews. Was she capable of murder, or was she being set up by someone else, perhaps Lucas, her lover? Adding to the intrigue was a partial surveillance video retrieved from a nearby building. The footage was grainy and incomplete, but it showed Emma entering the apartment on the night David died. The timestamp matched perfectly with the estimated time of death. But the video had gaps, critical moments were missing, and there was no footage of her leaving the scene. It was a tantalizing piece of evidence, but far from enough to convict her. As Sarah reviewed the evidence, a nagging feeling grew in her guts. Something wasn't right. Emma's involvement seemed too obvious, almost like a smokescreen. There were too many questions left unanswered. Why had David chosen to meet here, of all places? And why had the surveillance footage conveniently cut out at crucial moments? The deeper she went, the more it felt like the truth was being deliberately obscured. This wasn't just a case of a jealous wife and a cheating husband. This was something far more orchestrated. The pressure on Sarah was palpable. As the investigation dragged on with no clear resolution, her superiors grew impatient. They wanted results, and fast. Emma Thompson, the grieving widow with a questionable alibi, seemed the perfect suspect. "Wrap it up, Cooper." Captain McNamara's voice echoed in her head after their last meeting. "You've got enough to charge her. Let's move forward." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. It wasn't just Emma's strange calm, nor the conveniently placed fingerprints at the crime scene. It was deeper than that, an unsettling sense that they were missing something crucial, that someone was manipulating the entire narrative. Late at night, when the city had quieted down, Sarah began to feel the weight of unseen eyes on her. It started with subtle things. Cars parked too long outside her apartment. A strange car tailing her home from the precinct. A shadowy figure lurking just outside her peripheral vision. Paranoia crept in, but Sarah's instincts told her it wasn't unfounded. Someone wanted her to back off, to close the case quickly and leave the deeper layers untouched. It was a game of cat and mouse, and Sarah realized she was dangerously close to becoming the prey. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A routine review of surveillance footage from the area surrounding David's apartment revealed a fleeting glimpse of a man leaving the scene the night of the murder. His face was obscured, but Sarah recognized the gait. The silhouette was Lucas Hart, Emma's lover. The man had vanished, seemingly without a trace, but his sudden disappearance only raised more questions. How deeply was he involved? Had Emma masterminded the entire plot and manipulated Lucas into carrying out her dirty work? Or was she, too, a pawn in a much larger game, caught in a web of deceit woven by her lover? The duality of the situation gnawed at Sarah. Emma's vulnerability was becoming more evident in her interactions with the detective. She wavered between defiance and desperation, insisting on her innocence. Yet her involvement with Lucas made her complicity undeniable. Still, something about her story felt incomplete. Was she a cold-blooded manipulator, pulling the strings behind the scenes? Or had Lucas preyed on her emotional fragility, driving her to act in ways she never would have on her own? The more Sarah probed, the murkier the truth became, casting shadows over the case and leaving Sarah uncertain of whom to trust. The confrontation between Sarah and Emma was inevitable. The air in the interrogation room felt heavy, charged with unspoken tension. Emma sat across from Sarah, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "I told you everything I know," Emma muttered, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, I had an affair, but I didn't kill David. I could never." She trailed off, her hands wringing together, betraying the calm exterior she had tried so hard to maintain. Sarah leaned in, her gaze steady and unrelenting. "You expect me to believe that? Your fingerprints are all over that apartment, Emma. The video shows you there the night David died. You think Lucas is going to save you? He's gone, disappeared. You're all alone in this now." The words hit like a punch, and for the first time, Emma's composure shattered. Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head vehemently. "Lucas. He told me we'd be free. That once David was gone, we could be together. But I didn't know what he was planning. He did it, not me." I was just trying to escape." Her voice cracked as she finally confessed to the affair, but her insistence that Lucas was the mastermind remained unshaken. Sarah's jaw clenched as she processed Emma's words. Something still didn't fit. Then, like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place, the shocking truth emerged. David had known all along about the affair, about Lucas. He had been planning to fake his own death, to frame Emma and Lucas for his disappearance and start a new life, free from his financial troubles and personal demons. But the plan had gone horribly wrong. Lucas, sensing an opportunity, had turned the tables. Instead of following David's elaborate scheme, he had killed him, taking control of the situation. Sarah stared at Emma, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the room. David had orchestrated his own downfall, and in doing so, had unknowingly set off a chain of events that spiraled out of control. Emma, far from being the mastermind, had been caught in a trap, one laid by both her husband and her lover, each with their own agenda. The layers of deception ran deep, and as the truth unraveled, it became clear that no one in this twisted tragedy was truly innocent. The investigation had entered a crucial stage, and Sarah Cooper felt the weight of every new discovery pressing against her. The crime scene had already painted a picture of deceit, but it wasn't until the forensic team unearthed the most damning evidence that the puzzle began to take shape. The DNA evidence found at David Thompson's hidden apartment finally linked Lucas Hart, Emma's lover, to the scene. A few strands of hair, meticulously collected from the fabric of a discarded jacket, and trace amounts of his skin cells on the glassware pointed to his involvement. It was no longer just Emma under suspicion. Lucas had been there the night David was killed, and now, his presence was irrefutable. As Sarah reviewed the results in the sterile glow of the forensic lab, her mind raced. The link between Lucas and the crime scene changed everything. She recalled her earlier suspicions, the secretive calls, the erratic behavior of Emma, but now a clearer picture was emerging. Lucas had something to gain from David's death. Was it love that drove him to murder, or had Emma coerced him, promising the life of wealth and comfort she had always wanted? The surveillance cameras near David's apartment offered another vital clue. After hours of combing through grainy footage, the tech team found what they needed: David and Lucas meeting the night of his death. The footage wasn't perfect. Parts of it were obscured by passing vehicles in poor lighting, but it was enough. The timestamp indicated they had met just an hour before David's estimated time of death. Sarah paused the video, her eyes narrowing at the sight of Lucas's figure lingering outside the building long after David had entered. He had waited, watched. Perhaps he was weighing his next move, calculating when the moment would be right. This was no crime of passion. It was premeditated, cold, and deliberate. But the deeper Sarah dug, the more obstacles she encountered. Crestview's wealthy residents were starting to push back against the investigation. Subtly, at first casual remarks at charity events, murmurs of discontent at city council meetings. It soon became clear that more than just David Thompson. There were whispers that David's financial dealings ran deep within the community, implicating more than just Emma and Lucas. If this case unraveled completely, it could take down some of the most powerful figures in the city. Sarah found herself stonewalled at every turn. Requests for documents were delayed, subpoenas ignored, and witnesses suddenly forgot key details they had previously been eager to share. Sarah's frustration grew, but so did her resolve. The power and influence wielded by Crestview's elite were formidable, But she had seen this before. These were people who thought money could buy silence, that their wealth could bury the truth. But Sarah wasn't about to let them win. Still, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that she was being watched. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. The taillights of an unfamiliar car, parked outside her home late at night. The anonymous notes left on her windshield, "Leave this alone." The threats weren't idle. Someone, perhaps Lucas, perhaps one of Crestview's untouchables, wanted her to stop. But Sarah had no intention of stopping. The mounting pressure only sharpened her instincts, and she began to suspect that the case was even more complex than it seemed. Every move she made felt like a step deeper into the darkness, with no way of knowing who might be watching, or worse, waiting. As much as this was about solving David Thompson's murder, it was also about survival, hers, and the truth. The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable as the trial of Emma Thompson and Lucas Hart began. The prosecutor, a seasoned attorney named Alicia Ross, stood before the jury with a calm but commanding presence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear and steady. "What you'll hear over the course of this trial is a story of greed, betrayal, and premeditated murder." She painted Emma as the mastermind behind the plot to kill her husband, using Lucas Hart as her pawn. With David out of the way, Emma stood to inherit his vast fortune, a motive as clear as any. Ross presented the DNA evidence and the surveillance footage, making a compelling case that Lucas had acted on Emma's orders. This wasn't a crime of passion, Ross emphasized, pacing in front of the jury. It was calculated, planned, and now they must answer for it. She detailed the circumstantial evidence, the texts between Emma and Lucas, the financial troubles David had been facing, and the growing distance in their marriage. The pieces fit together neatly, and for a moment, it seemed the case was airtight. But the defense had a different narrative. Mark Preston, Emma's lawyer, wasted no time in dismantling the prosecution's case. "Emma Thompson is not a murderer," he declared, his voice soft but firm. "She is a victim of manipulation, deception, and fear." He pointed to Lucas Hart as the true villain in this story, a man who had seduced Emma, preyed on her vulnerabilities, and used her to gain access to David's wealth. Emma, Preston argued, had been caught in a web spun by Lucas, a man with everything to gain from David's death. The defense's strategy was clear: portray Emma as a woman trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Preston called witnesses who testified to Emma's fragile mental state, her fear of Lucas, and her increasing desperation in a loveless marriage. Emma wanted out, Preston admitted, but she never wanted this. He presented his own evidence messages from Lucas that hinted at coercion, at threats he had made if Emma didn't comply with his plans. It was enough to cast doubt, enough to make the jury question whether Emma had truly been in control of the events that led to David's death. The trial became a battleground of conflicting testimonies, each side presenting their version of the truth. Witnesses faltered under cross-examination, and the evidence, though compelling, wasn't conclusive. The jury sat stone-faced, absorbing every twist, every contradiction. The truth, it seemed, was slipping further from their grasp with every passing day. As the closing arguments loomed, it was clear this case wouldn't have a simple resolution. Emma's guilt, Lucas's involvement, and the shadowy figures of Crestview's elite all hung in the balance. The verdict, when it finally came, would be as much a reflection of justice as it would be of the power dynamics at play in this tangled web of murder and deceit. The courtroom was eerily silent as the jury returned, the weight of their decision palpable. The foreman stood, his voice steady as he read the verdict. Lucas Hart, the lover, was found guilty of first-degree murder. There was no denying his direct involvement. His DNA was at the crime scene. The surveillance footage showed him lurking outside the apartment, and the timeline of events clearly pointed to his premeditated actions. His face remained impassive as the words fell like a gavel on his fate. Emma Thompson, on the other hand, was found guilty of being an accomplice, but received a lighter sentence. The lack of direct evidence linking her to the actual murder worked in her favor. Her manipulation of Lucas, though evident, wasn't enough to convict her of orchestrating the entire plot. As the sentence was handed down, Emma's expression flickered with a mix of relief and despair, relief at avoiding life imprisonment, but despair at the price she'd paid. Public opinion, however, was less forgiving. Painted her as the femme fatale who escaped true justice, leaving the community divided. Some believed she was as guilty as Lucas, the mastermind who had skillfully covered her tracks. Others pitied her, seeing her as a victim of both her lover's influence and her husband's controlling nature. For Detective Sarah Cooper, the case's conclusion brought little satisfaction. Though justice was served, the moral ambiguity gnawed at her. Lucas may have been the killer, but Emma's role in the tragedy left a stain on her conscience. She had uncovered the truth, yet the blurred lines between victim and perpetrator made it impossible to find peace. The danger she faced, the threats, the lizard, all left a mark. The case was over, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the real cost was far deeper than any courtroom could judge. As the case closed, the echoes of greed, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of forbidden desires lingered. The story of David, Emma, and Lucas wasn't just about murder. It was a cautionary tale of the fragility of trust and the destructive power of ambition. For Sarah, the investigation left her with more questions than answers, a hard lesson in the complex web of human motives. She had seen the worst of people, not just the cold-blooded acts of violence, but the quiet manipulation and subtle betrayals that destroyed lives just as effectively. In the end, Sarah realized that no one was truly innocent in this story. Not Lucas, and perhaps not even herself. The balance between her personal life and the dark truths of her work became harder to maintain. And though the case was closed, the haunting reality of the choices made would follow her. A reminder that the search for justice often leaves scars of its own.